Welcome to Capitol Report, hosted by your Congressman, Adam Schiff. Each month, Capitol Report keeps you informed of progress being made in Washington, D.C. and at home on public policy issues of interest to our community. And now, here's the host of the show, your Congressman, Adam Schiff.
Hello, I'm Congressman Adam Schiff, and welcome again to Capitol Report. Today our guest is Dr. Rajiv Shah, Administrator of the USAID. As the 16th USAID Administrator, Dr. Shah leads the agency that has provided economic and humanitarian assistance worldwide for almost 50 years. Previously, Dr. Shah served as Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics, and as Chief Scientist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Prior to joining the Obama administration, Dr. Shah served as the Director of Agricultural Development in the Global Development Program at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Originally from Detroit, Michigan, and a graduate of the University of Michigan, Dr. Shah went on to earn his Doctor of Medicine from the University of Pennsylvania and his Master of Science in Health Economics at the Wharton School of Business. In 2007, Dr. Shah was named a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. Dr. Shah, welcome. Really appreciate your joining me today.
Thank you.
I understand you have some Pasadena roots. Tell me about that.
I do. You know, my parents are both immigrants from India, and my father came here as an engineer and started working on an Apollo space program project and was living in Pasadena when he first arrived in the United States. So my father and mother both started their journey in the United States in Pasadena.
And then he made the tragic decision to move to Detroit.
He did, and so I was born and raised in Michigan, which is, I know, much colder and sometimes less entertaining than Southern California. But it's a place we care about deeply and watch Rose Bowl Parade every year.
You should have come and gotten your degree at Caltech.
I would have loved to, but I'm a Michigan person. So.
Well, there's always time. You don't have a PhD yet, right?
No, I don't.
Okay, well then there's still opportunity. Well, I really appreciate your sitting down with me. There are a few agencies with a greater role in terms of what's happening in the world than USAID. But I'd like to start ask you a little bit about the core mission of USAID. I think a lot of people, they're familiar with what the State Department does. They're a little less familiar with what USAID does. So tell us a little bit about the agency.
Well, it's a fabulous agency, and our core mission is to extend really human opportunity and dignity to the farthest corners of the globe. We work in global health and food security to make sure kids get access to food and have a chance to lead a healthy and productive life. We work in economic support to provide governments and partner countries a better chance to grow their economies and move people out of poverty. And we work to extend democracy and better governance around the world. So it's a great agency. We've had a storied history. USAID helped avert large-scale famines in parts of the world through investing in the Green Revolution. We are our country's first responder to major crises like what we saw after the earthquake in Haiti that killed tragically 200,000 Haitians. USAID and its partners were the first to be responding and supporting the survivors. So it's a great agency, and I'm honored to be a part of it.
And what's the origin of the agency?
Actually, the agency started in 1961. It was launched by President Kennedy as part of New Frontier. It was a part of extending American values and the best that the United States had to offer. Our science, our technology, our commitment to serve, and our desire to spread democratic ideals around the world. And so that's our ultimate origin. It was created 50 years ago this year by President Kennedy, and I actually started my own career in development working on a service program just before I went to medical school in a very rural part of South India. And I remember meeting with families there that were very poor and kids who really, so many kids would die under the age of 5 because they didn't get basic medical access and didn't have access to vaccines in particular. And in their one-room schoolhouse, on the wall above the chalkboard, were pictures of major figures in Indian history and the Indian Revolution and President Kennedy.
Wow.
Because he created this agency and because of what he represented.
Did you ever think when you were growing up in Michigan that you would one day be running a huge agency formed in the Kennedy administration?
I did not. I expected to be an auto engineer. So.
Well, I guess that's probably most people's expectation around Detroit. Well, I have met some just extraordinary people in USAID, and I just want to tell you about one of them on a fairly recent trip to Afghanistan. I remember meeting a young man who was from USAID doing great work in Afghanistan, often, out sort of beyond the wire, without much in terms of security. To be effective, you have to be close to where the people are, and you can't be, encamped in a large military base. It's a one-year stint, and I asked him how it was going. He'd been there for a month, and he told me that not only he was there, but his wife was there also. She was also with USAID, so they were essentially starting out their young married life together, working in Afghanistan. And that he had already upped for his second year. And I said jokingly, wow, you like it that much that you've been here for a month and you're already ready to commit for a second year? And he said, well, it's not that so much as, we're in the development business, and you really don't get to see something developed in a single year, and I want to see the fruits of my labors. And I thought, wow, what a inspiring person this is. And I know you have countless folks like that in your agency.
We do. The commitment to service and the commitment to delivering results for really the people who often don't have voice on their own and don't get a fair shot at life is very much built into the fabric of our people and what we represent. I was in Afghanistan last week, and I met with our teams there. And, they take on tremendous risks, just as much risks as our military counterparts. They work side by side with our military counterparts. And because of USAID investments and because our folks get out and talk to school kids and talk to families and visit communities, today more than 7 million children, girls, are in school in Afghanistan. And when the Taliban fell, of course, there were no girls in school because they weren't allowed to be in school. So we've constructed hundreds of schools, and we've helped really stand up a full education system and provide access to, basically the most important investment you can make for the long-term stability of a country. Today, more than 60% of Afghans have access to some basic health care. And that's, again, because USAID has been working on that in a focused way. It's taken a decade to build a system that can do that and do that efficiently. But there have been big signs of success in some of these programs and projects, and this type of development assistance can deliver real results, and results that help ultimately keep our country stable and more secure, because we all would rather have a more stable, more prosperous, more inclusive Afghan society than a situation where we have to go in with our military.
President Hamid Karzai has recently been making noise about wanting a withdrawal or a timetable, not just for the military troops, but for NGOs and some of the international assistance that's going on there. What do you see is behind this? Is he serious about this? What will it mean in terms of the efforts that USAID is undertaking?
Well, I think President Karzai is serious, and we listen to and respect and work in partnership with the government at all levels, the federal government, but also local shuras, which are informal gatherings of local leaders, and they come together in their communities and try to address their problems and their concerns. USAID is working in a manner that's pretty aligned with the government. We recognize, and President Obama's policy is to transition U.S. forces out of Afghanistan and to engage in a long-term development partnership with Afghanistan that is very respectful of local sovereignty and local institutions. So we're on the same path together. I think President Karzai is referring sometimes to the heavy presence, physical presence we have, and the security presence that is often required in the current situation, because we can't, take undue risks. Our people take tremendous risks already, but they do need security to get out and about. And we're working through a lot of those issues. But the goal is the same. The goal is to have a stable, sovereign Afghanistan that is building the basis of its own growth and prosperity, and for us to step back and be partners in that effort.
I know that he would like to see more of the assistance routed through the Afghan government, so that it can establish its credibility with the Afghan people, which we want to see as well. At the same time, we have concerns about corruption in the Karzai government and not wanting to lose accountability. How do we balance those two things? And I know we have similar issues in Pakistan.
Well, our first and most important obligation is to deliver results for American taxpayers. And so we have a zero tolerance policy for corruption in the implementation of our assistance program. We do provide significant support to the Afghan government budget. We do it through a program called the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund. It's a program that a number of partners like the World Bank and the United Kingdom and others are partners with us in that mechanism. And we track resources through that very, very closely. Just last week I was visiting with the beneficiaries of some of the funding we provided to that through a program called the National Solidarity Program. And it's an outstanding program. I visited a community of people that had come together. They had built a local governance mechanism so they could talk to each other and adjudicate whatever disagreements they had. They decided to build a health clinic and a school, and they applied to this fund and got resources to do that. And it's a great example of how we can help connect the central Afghan government to local communities and have them focus on building their own future together. It was a $60,000 investment in a health clinic and a school is creating untold opportunity for that community. And in fact, there was just a Harvard and MIT study that validated the effectiveness and security of the National Solidarity Program. So it can be done, and we can see success, but we're very focused on making sure our resources actually deliver results.
How do you feel things are going across the border in Pakistan? I know that you've been involved in a rather seismic shift in how we deliver assistance, which historically has been it's sometimes very beltway-centric, in that a lot of foreign assistance get eaten up before it ever leaves the country. And then when it's used by NGOs, they tend to be foreign NGOs or international NGOs. I know there's a real effort to put a Pakistani face on the Pakistani efforts, both to help its civilian government, but also because it can be very cost effective. But still there are capacity problems and similar corruption problems. How do you assess how things are going there?
Well, first, I'd step back, and as you point out the history, there have been periods of our time in our history with Pakistan where we've pulled back and ceased to offer any assistance. And we've seen a big negative consequence from those types of decisions. So it's very important that we have a steady, credible, long-standing partnership with the Pakistani people and the Pakistani democratically elected government. Our current investment portfolio is very focused on helping to improve the energy sector in Pakistan so that businesses can grow and you could see more investment and more economic activity. It's a country of 180 million people, and the energy base is very, very, very low. We also invest in health and education and agriculture, and during this past year we made a big investment to protect the nearly 20 million people who were affected from pretty catastrophic flooding that wiped out 60% of their agriculture and destroyed community after community along the Indus River floodplain. So, in all of those efforts, we set very clear targets and goals for what we hope to achieve, and we go out there and measure results. And, that's how we try to manage the challenge of producing results when you're investing U.S. taxpayer dollars, with the reality that these are sometimes very difficult environments to work in.
The floods you mentioned in Pakistan, the floods we saw in Australia, unsuccessful agricultural seasons in China, and other events have caused a food crisis. Food prices are escalating in some places as much as 30% in a year. Many people think that has contributed as much, if not more, to the events in Egypt and Tunisia as anything else. How is USAID trying to cope with these rising food prices? Where do you see it heading? And is there any way to get ahead of this?
Well, there absolutely is a way to get ahead of this. And I would just say in 2008 we saw a similar, actually an even more acute spike in food prices. And the results were catastrophic. We had nearly 40 food riots in big cities around the world. We saw some governments fall when that happened. We saw entire societies where 80 or 90% of disposable income, places like Malawi or Nigeria, are spent securing food for families. We saw societies where people had to pull their kids out of school and stop investing in other things because they had to spend more just to feed their families. And worst of all, for the first time in decades, we saw 100 million people around the world we're pushed back into a state of chronic hunger, and we're going to bed hungry every night for the first time in decades. And so President Obama has launched a program called Feed the Future. And it's basically a return to our roots. It recognizes that if we reinvest in agriculture, science, technology, the things we know how to do, we can help countries grow more food. And they're going to need to do that in order to get through these food crises. They're going to need to do that because by 2050 we're going to have 9 billion people on the planet, and people eating more grain-intensive foods like meats and poultry. And if we want to have a global community that is secure and that is able to be stable and connected and have the basis of prosperity, societies around the world need to have effective food security. And so this is a program we're very excited about. I just worked with PepsiCo, and we launched some major corporate partnerships in sub-Saharan Africa, in Ethiopia in that case, to really help reach 30,000 small farm households and help them improve their productivity. And PepsiCo will then produce food products with chickpeas that are very high in nutritional value, and then they'll sell that to the World Food Program, so that the World Food Program can use that high protein feed in how it responds for the very poorest people who are in a state of acute hunger. And those are the kinds of innovative private sector partnerships that we think can really help transform agriculture and food security in places like Africa or South Asia.
Well, let me ask you about some of the events that are going on right now that are just captivating the world's attention, and which I find to be very promising. And that is a movement that was started by a fruit vendor in Tunisia, which is now spreading throughout the Arab world and has brought down not only the Tunisian government but the Egyptian one as well. We have always had a assistance relationship with countries in this region. How do you anticipate that changing in places like Tunisia and Egypt? We obviously have a lot at stake in the success of those enterprises. At the same time, we don't want to be seen as meddling. So how do we provide assistance in making sure that the democratic governance takes root and thrives, and do so in a way that doesn't make it look like we're picking winners and losers?
Well, the President Obama's policy on Egypt and on open society and democratic governance in the Middle East and around the world is very clear. He has very clearly suggested that these countries and their leaders should be on a transition pathway, and a responsible, measured, but clear and credible transition. And the United States and USAID can provide a lot of support in supporting those transitions. We have a long-standing partnership in Egypt, as you mentioned, and while some other aspects of the partnership, like the military partnerships, get a lot of attention, the USAID program in Egypt over 30 years has helped girls go to school. It's helped girls and boys get access to higher education. We've significantly improved child mortality by making sure that kids have access to basic medicines and therefore are less likely to die during their youth. And we've helped create the basis of a more open economy. Just in the last 6 years, our support for their efforts to collect taxes and have improved business climate has helped Egypt increase their position on the international rankings from 165 to 95 on a World Bank study called the Doing Business Report. And that's allowed for more open private sector activity. So we're now looking at those programs and making sure we implement those programs in a way that is consistent with supporting a credible transition. And we're working with the government. We're also working with civil society organizations and non-governmental partners, as we have for some time, to really recognize that we are a partner, and we're a partner in a brighter, more open future.
I hear exactly what you're saying, and I see through the work on the Foreign Operations Subcommittee and on the Intelligence Committee the importance of the work you do. But right now we're in this tremendous budget crisis. We're trying to balance our budget. We're trying to pay down our national debt. Foreign assistance has always made an attractive target, and it is again. I find there's often a great misapprehension about how much we spend on foreign assistance as a percentage of our overall budget. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How big a slice of the federal budget is foreign assistance? I think most people operate under the expectation it's 10 to 20%. I think they'll be surprised to find out it's not quite so much. But if you could tell us a little bit about how big a slice it is currently, and why you feel there's a compelling case to be made to continue having this as part of our strategic arsenal.
Sure. Well, I've seen the same data that indicate most people think we spend 20% of the federal budget on foreign assistance. The reality is we spend less than 0.5% on foreign aid. And the other reality is there's an impression sometimes that our assistance, perhaps as it might have been at different points in our history, is really about writing checks and not understanding what we're getting in return. That's no longer true. Today, our investments are very focused on delivering specific, measurable results. The investments we're making in the Feed the Future program that we talked about, in just 4 countries, we think we can move 6.5 million people out of poverty and hunger by improving their agriculture, and we think that will cost less than 1/10 of what it would otherwise cost to provide food aid when there's a famine. In global health, for example, we think in one area alone, immunizations and vaccines, smart, targeted investments over the next few years can save 4 million children, just simply by making sure kids around the world have the same access to vaccines that we've had in the United States for 30, 40 years. Today, only about 60% of the kids get access to those vaccines, and that's why a lot of children die under the age of 5 needlessly. So these are the types of things we're doing with our foreign assistance, trying to measure results, demonstrate how investments we make really do create for more prosperous and healthier and more stable societies. Because at the end of the day, we all want to live in a world where we have partners and not unstable risks out there in our global community. And I'd point us to the United Kingdom. The UK just made really significant cuts in their overall budget because they too face a significant fiscal crisis. But they did it while honoring their commitment to continue to increase their investment in development and development assistance. And that's because they recognize that this is about our national security and that it is far cheaper to invest in healthier, more stable societies now than it is to engage with our military should we need to in the future.
Well, I think that goes back to probably the Kennedy administration's genesis of the program, both as a humanitarian effort and a strategic effort. Yeah. I look at the kind of resources, both in terms of blood and treasure, that we're expending in Afghanistan, and think about how if we can make the right investments in a place like Yemen and prevent Yemen from becoming the next Afghanistan, we would be, penny wise and pound foolish not to.
Yeah.
The military assistance that we've been giving Egypt, for example, gives us a connection to the Egyptian military, which right now is indispensable. They are the strongest institution that keeps the country on a solid footing during this transition. And our relationship with that military gives us an opportunity to have a seat at the table in terms of trying to keep them moving in the democratic direction and make sure that one authoritarian regime doesn't get replaced by another. So I appreciate the work you're doing and know how critically important it is. Can you give us another example, if you would, that puts it in very human terms, about one of the USAID efforts, one of the success stories? It could be a large program or it could be a single effort of someone who out in the field told you what they've been able to accomplish that will kind of bring it home to people what the agency is all about.
Well, I'm going to give you 2.
Okay.
One is from Ghana, and because we're talking about democracies and democratic transitions, Ghana recently completed successfully a democratic transition and an effective election, and in many ways has inspired other African countries to follow a pathway of elections and democracy. USAID quietly but effectively trained 4,000 election observers, supported the Ghanaian election system, and really helped them get through that process in a very effective way a few years ago. And it's the kind of thing we do in Iraq and Afghanistan and many other parts of the world. But it's a skill set and a capability that's very important in helping people realize their rights and helping people realize and determine their future. But there's one other example I wanted to share, which is I a number of years ago, before I was even at USAID, I visited an organization called, it's a hospital called ICDDRB in Bangladesh. And you walk through there and you meet, it was set up as a cholera hospital by the United States 30 years ago when they were experiencing a massive famine. And you meet women with children that are just so small, and they're so weak, and they're often incapable of engaging emotionally with you because they are hungry. And over the past few years, we've worked very, very closely with the government of Bangladesh, civil society partners, and farmers in Bangladesh. And they are changing dramatically the face of child poverty, child hunger in Bangladesh. And they're doing it at very low cost because they're growing more food locally, they're getting children better nutrition, more protein, certain meat and dairy products, and it's making a huge difference. And I just reviewed a program that showed a 40% reduction amongst a program we had created in stunting for children, which is children who don't achieve their height because they've been deprived of food and protein through most of their diet for most of their life. Those are the kinds of things we're capable of. Very little investments, and we can move 40% of the people who would be sitting in that hospital malnourished and unable to communicate to a state of existence where they have a shot at a much brighter future. And those are the kinds of investments the American people should be proud of, because we do it all over the world and it's very efficient and very effective.
We just have a few seconds left, but for the young people and not so young people who are watching that may be interested, how can they get involved with USAID? How could they apply for a position or otherwise help?
Well, join us. We're trying to rebuild our foreign service. It's a wonderful career to be out in all of these different places, making the world a better place. You can go to our website at usaid.gov and get more information about joining us or so many of our partners. And I would just say to the young people out there that, no matter what you do, if you're an engineer or a doctor or a teacher, you have a skill set that can be deployed to help make the world a better place and can help change the face of poverty around the world, and we need you to get engaged. So please join us.
Well, Dr. Shah, thank you for being engaged, and thanks again for joining us today. I'm Congressman Adam Schiff, and join us again next month when we bring you another of the nation's leaders, and I'll see you then.
Thank you for watching Capitol Report with Congressman Adam Schiff. If you have any comments, please call our office or visit Congressman Schiff's website, where you can sign up online for email updates from our nation's capital.